Welcome to the Mini Break, your daily podcast for the biggest storylines, results, and controversies from the tennis world. Today is Wednesday, July 10th. Semifinals now set at the 2024 Wimbledon Championships. How did we get here? What have we learned? And where are we with the current state of grass court tennis? Those are the questions we hope to answer here on today's show, and there is no better place for us to answer those questions than live on our Cracked Racquets YouTube channel. So great to be back. Hopefully, all of you tuning in to this show live will throw your questions our way. Any thoughts, comments, observations you have from the year's third major, we'd love to hear them. That's why we want to produce more live content moving forward. But of course, obviously, we've reached the business end here of the 2024 Wimbledon Championships. Semifinals in singles now set. Joining me to help discuss how we got here, a man who joins me so frequently on this podcast. In fact, he was my co-host on the very last episode you'll find on your Mini Break podcast feed. Of course, we all know him best as a returning champion here on our Cracked Racquets shows, essentially a co-host of this Mini Break podcast, lead editor for allthingstennis.com, the man who is always ready to introduce a Real Housewives anecdote our way. It's David Kane, who joins us once again. DK, welcome back to the show. As always, you look wonderful here live on our YouTube channel. I'm glad our listeners, viewers get to see your smiling face the way I do. How are you feeling tonight as we approach the Wimbledon semifinals?
I mean, bringing up the group chat right out of the gate with that grass court tennis dig. I mean, to quote the Real Housewives, don't talk about my kids, don't talk about my husband. I mean, you're just really like letting it all hang out there. One minute in, but I have all my fan in the group chat. They're ready to defend me. They're ready to defend my point for sure.
Well,
So
I'm glad to hear it, and I do think it's worth revisiting before we get into our quarterfinal recaps where we left things off, because it was the last podcast I recorded. I obviously very much enjoyed championship weekend at the Bloomfield Hills Challenger or Cranbrook Tennis Classic. Very cool to see just the third All-American Teenage Final in ATP Challenger history. I certainly think we're going to be seeing a lot of Lerner Tien, Nishesh Basavireddy moving forward. However, given the obligations on site there, I needed the past couple of days to catch up on all the matches. I had to go back and rewatch Iga Swiatek getting knocked out of this event. I had to go back and rewatch Lulu Sun's dramatic run to the quarterfinals. How did she do it? Donna Vekic's emergence again. None of those storylines, they were all in the realm of possibility, but that's not where I was when we spoke last Friday. And so a tip of the cap to you here to start this show. You said you were feeling some chaos still on the women's side. I thought otherwise. You want to take a victory lap here to start?
I think, didn't we do what we always do, which is hype up the stability of the draw, and then Iga Swiatek immediately loses the next day. And after we go, like, there's no way there could be any more chaos than chaos reigns. So I think may have something to do with us and our voodoo, but I'm still stuck on your use of the phrase challenger history, which seems like a bit of an oxymoron, unless it involves Zendaya, in which case she made plenty of challengers history, but I don't know, maybe you'll explain that one a little bit later on in the show.
Yeah, we can get into all things Lerner Nishesh and the history of that. But no, I mean, again,
Don't keep me in suspense.
I guess, look, we're going to get into the state of grass court tennis at the end of this show, because yes, that is something we've been discussing in the group chat, and certainly the binge watching of grass court tennis I have done over the last 72 hours. It's very much present in my mind. But let's start with that draw on the women's side, because certainly going into these semifinals, I didn't have any of, I had, one of the four remaining. Not, again, three of the four, I don't think I had anywhere near the quarterfinals, let alone semifinal round here that we have. And
well, I had none of them, so you beat me on that one.
Ultimately, again, the matchups we get: Krejcikova versus Rybakina, Vekic versus Paolini. We'll get to the Rybakina of it all in a moment. But of those other three, Krejcikova, Paolini, Vekic, which of those semifinalists surprises you the most, David Kane? Or maybe not surprises, but let's start here. Which is the most intriguing storyline of those three players? Which is the most intriguing to you as we approach the semifinals and think about how we got here?
So many choices. I mean, it's funny. I was thinking about the state of the draw, and it reminded me, ironically, because she factors in such a big part in both the 2021 Roland Garros draw, which also featured Barbora Krejcikova. And it was one of those moments where we weren't really paying attention to how much the draw had sort of fallen apart because it was all about Iga Swiatek, and she was very much in the hunt for her second straight French Open title. And then she lost it to Maria Sakkari in the quarters. And you look around and you go, wait a minute, who's left to win this tournament? But I feel like here it's sort of the opposite, where we've been so focused on the draw falling apart that and I think a large part of that's because we didn't expect Elena Rybakina to hold up. And if we had the confidence that we certainly should have in her based on her talent and her ability and the fact that she's won in this tournament before, I don't think we'd be so doom and gloom we would have been so doom and gloom about the state of the tournament, because there is Elena Rybakina rounding into form, looking like the odds-on favorite to win this tournament with no problems against Elina Svitolina. And from a top-line perspective, I do think there's an argument to be made that she's the most compelling storyline, because for all of the talk about the big three in women's tennis, Rybakina has really lagged behind both Sabalenka and Swiatek in the last 2 years when it comes to major count. And this is her opportunity to rack up a second slam and tie with Sabalenka. And if she could do that at the end of the week. But then there's also arguments to be made about Krejcikova, about Jasmine Paolini backing up her Roland Garros run. And of course, Donna Vekic, finally making good on all that grass court promise that she's displayed for a decade now. I think it was 2014 when she made her first grass court final in Birmingham. So, I mean, certainly a player who's played well in this tournament before. So when you look at the totality of it, if you're analyzing the draw, not having fallen out of the coconut tree, and living in the context of all that has been and all that will be, it's not as crazy. It's not as chaotic as I actually thought it was going to be.
So there's a lot there for me to unpack. I appreciate that. Was a broad synopsis of where things stand and how we got here. You alluded to it, so let's just get into the big headline now, because of course, mainstream, looking at this Wimbledon, what matters most, who's going to raise the trophy at the end, and who will that be most impactful for? And you kind of nailed it on the head. The opportunity is there for Elena Rybakina to cement the status that certainly, if you follow the tour week in, week out, the way you and I both do, she has been a tier one player for the duration of this 2024 season. Just look at the overall headline results that she's put together so far this year. Obviously, 2024 specific, she's 40-7 here on July 10th, DK. Beat Sabalenka in a Brisbane final to start the year. Yeah, had the bad Australia, but wins Abu Dhabi, finals Doha, finals Miami, wins Stuttgart, beating Swiatek to do so. Quarterfinals to Paolini, she loses in 3 sets. I think 6 months from now, we'll be like, it's a fine loss. Jasmine Paolini was the 5th best player in the world for this 2024 season. She's 40-7 overall in the year, DK, and they're really outside of Australia, I suppose, that second round exit to Blinkova. Like, that's been the one, pun intended, blink for Rybakina so far this season. And you compound this with the fact that obviously she wins Wimbledon in 2022. Quietly, again, it didn't seem like the loudest 47-15 season last year, but she made quarterfinals of Wimbledon. She made finals of the Australian Open to start the season, wins Indian Wells, made the Miami final back-to-back in 2023 as well. You kind of nailed it. Elena Rybakina wins this, and Tier 1 has at least 3 names going forward for the next 18 months, probably, maybe longer. And again, I know there's a Coco Gauff piece to that discussion that Summer's hearing 3 names. Why not 4? We can get to that maybe in a second. But I do think that's what this Wimbledon run would mean, right? We talked about this coming, when we did our halfway mark show. Swiatek and Sabalenka are Tier 1 players. They've earned that status. Look at the results week in, week out, how consistent they have been. I guess grass courts aside for Iga. Rybakina, this was the slam. Like, this is the opportunity to kind of put everything to bed and cement her status amongst that group, because at that point it will have been 18 to 24 months of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like you said, perception is sort of 18 months behind reality. And I think we were just starting to get around to entertaining the idea of Coco Gauff as a big 3 player, because she has been in some ways the most consistent player at majors over the last 12 months, and really starting to push Rybakina down to maybe that 4th best player, because as obvious as her weapons are and as clear as her talent and abilities are, it is not matching up to her Grand Slam prowess, which by contrast, you see players like a Sabalenka, a Gauff, a Swiatek, who's obviously won, the last 2 Roland Garros titles. They were the ones showing up at slams most consistently. Rybakina simply wasn't. I mean, that quarterfinal at Wimbledon that you cited, relative to her other major outings, a success, but it was certainly not the run that I thought, or certainly she thought she was going to have, in her title defense. That seemed like a pretty clear run to the semis for her, and for Jabeur to beat her and really kind of derailed her season in many ways if she wasn't really as present for the next 6 months of the year. So it's really is And it just, again, speaks to the fact that she came into this tournament sort of under the radar in a way that no one who plays like her should be. And so I think, should she win this title, certainly acquit herself well in the next 2 rounds, even if she doesn't win. If we have a Jasmine Paolini or even a Donna Vekic have a miracle performance and play really great in the final, I still think it would do a lot to reassert Rybakina amongst the top of the game.
Yeah, and look, she has beaten the best of the best this season. She has multiple wins. Excuse me, she has wins over both Iga and Sabalenka so far this year. This Wimbledon draw has been the most ideal for Elena Rybakina to face off against the Caroline Wozniacki, who, I'm sorry, but did not have a single weapon to hurt her. Like, that match was assault in her third round 0-1 victory. Even in the quarters, her 3-2 win over Svitolina. Like, yeah, Svitolina had a little depth on some returns, was able to make Rybakina uncomfortable at times, but man, outside of a first serve and a really effective first forehand, everything was on Rybakina's terms in those quarterfinals. And as you see the draw on our screen, for those of you tuning into the live show, you look at the players remaining, again, yeah, Vekic can play a brand of line drive tennis that can make players uncomfortable. Rybakina's just better at that game style than her. Paolini, you feel like if it's a Rybakina-Paolini matchup in the final, it's the grass court version of the final we just saw at Roland Garros, where it's like, oh, Paulini's had this fantastic run. She's just running up against the buzzsaw who does all the things exactly right on this surface to make this matchup particularly lopsided. That's why, to me, the most interesting matchup is this semifinal against Krejcikova. But from a tennis perspective, David Kane, and we've talked about this before, like, Rybakina's power makes sense. Rybakina's ease with which she takes the racket out of opponents' hands, ease with which she can play on her front foot and dictate terms. And then, again, sneaky good mover, I would argue, Elena Rybakina as well. For someone that size, I would point out the return percentage breaking 35.3% of the time. That's 3.1% better than last year, and it's 4 straight years of improvement. If sustained for the full season, it would be a career high. Like, she is continuing to get better as well. And so it's just like it's a compounding of factors, right? The draw broke perfectly for her. She's healthy. The tennis and confidence are there with the resume she's put together this season. Like, I'm surprised this didn't slap us in the face before the tournament, how obvious this Rybakina pick should have been. Because, again, all signs in retrospect kind of point to it.
I mean, I think she's also a rhythm-based player, and I think it's not a coincidence that her toughest match in the tournament so far was against the Laura Siegemund, a player who probably gave her very little to no rhythm for most of those 3 sets. And then for the subsequent 3 rounds, Wozniacki, Kalinskaya, Svitolina gave her balls that she could really play herself into form. And, that's only going to make her that much tougher to beat in the semifinals against Krejcikova, who, for all of her natural ball striking and clean technique, has a pretty extreme grip on that forehand that I would expect Rybakina to start hitting through and breaking down with far more efficiency than even Elena Ostapenko was able to earlier today in the quarterfinals.
I also like the idea, and this is a narrative thing, and I apologize because we try to stray away from those. I try to live in the world of the objective, but let's talk about the world of the subjective merging with the objective. I'm just feeling big words here today, DK. I'm home in my parents' house. I have to. Not that those are particularly big words, but Rybakina becoming a multi-time slam champion. Now, all of a sudden, she's in her prime and a multi-slam champion. Sabalenka's in her prime and a multi-slam champion. I don't know if Iga's in her prime yet. That's a discussion, again, we can have at a different point, but clearly a world #1 and multi-slam champion. Becomes a little bit more difficult to shit on this era when that becomes the case, DK. And you start to look at these players ascending, the actual tennis they are playing. Again, the technique for Rybakina is better than Sabalenka's. Like, it is. That power to how she manufactures her power tennis is more controlled, if that makes sense, with the backswings, with the consistency of repetition of what her swings look like. And, again, the body momentum's not falling everywhere like when Sabalenka hits that back foot forehand. All of a sudden now, if we have 3 multi-slam champions all at the top of the game, all at the peaks of their powers, like, doesn't the era start to gain a little bit more respect?
I wish you weren't asking me this question live, really putting me on the spot. I mean, I don't know. I still think it would take another 3 to 5 years to really bear all that out. I think we still need to see, what's going to happen. I mean, obviously, we're dealing with a tournament that began with, Arina Sabalenka pulling out because of a potentially, damaging injury. We need to see how she recovers from that. We want to see how Iga Swiatek rebounds from this loss and how she, goes back to the drawing board when it comes to performing at slams outside of Paris. Well, yes, she's won the US Open, made semis in Australia. The last couple of non-Roland Garros slams have not been that successful for her. Rybakina came into this tournament under the radar and played really well. How will she perform when she's expected to do this? I think there are all these questions that we have to answer that certainly, bar none, those are three, I would say, once in a generation talents in all fairly different ways. The way that they go about winning the point is, while both Sabalenka and Rybakina have similar objectives, they go about it in ways that could be aesthetically quite different and compelling to different groups of fans. So I certainly think we have the makings of a really compelling big three, but I don't know if this Wimbledon title cinches it up in terms of the ideal narrative. I think I've been burnt a little bit too many times over the last 18 months.
The knock, if you want to have one against Rybakina, just 3-2 against top 10 opponents this year, but 2 of those 3 wins are against Iga and Sabalenka. So that's a little boost to that resume. 10-4 against the top 20, 4D7, overall on the year. And again, she's made the quarterfinals or further, DK, of every event she's played this season. Every event, except for, the Australian Open. Those things matter to me. Like, that sort of consistency week in, week out is that final piece that cements a status in a tier above where you were before, and just it's staring us in the face. I think if she wins this title, it becomes that much more clear, even though I think a lot of us were probably already there already. I think the biggest test remaining is Barbora Krejcikova, and I want to spend some time talking about her here, DK, because obviously for Krejcikova to go on this run, dare I say, out of nowhere. Now, she did make quarters of Australia earlier this year, but you look at the results for her heading into this grass court season, she had lost 5 consecutive matches, makes a quarterfinal in Birmingham, but wasn't particularly inspiring in a straight set loss to Potapova, 3-set loss in Eastbourne the next week to Leylah Fernandez. Now she comes out, she dropped just 1 set on her way to getting to this semifinal, goes 3 with Kudermetova in round number 1, wins over Volynets, Buzes Mineiro, then Collins and Ostapenko these last 2 rounds. She's just a fascinating player because obviously since the breakout season, 45-19 in 2021, she wins that French Open. She quarters the US Open that year, round of 16 Wimbledon after it as well. Into the tour finals she went. It just felt like this rapid ascension that all of a sudden was slowed down with a bunch of different injuries. How much different, since the start of 2022, she's played 114 matches, which again, that sounds like a lot, but it's been 2.5 years. It's not a full tour level schedule. It's just so fascinating because of the pockets we've had of her at times, right? The Sabalenka-Krejcikova rivalry to start last year, the Ostrava run, I want to say end of 2022, Australia quarterfinals to start this year, now Wimbledon semifinals as well. What have you made of Krejcikova's run? Do you think she can beat Elena Rybakina?
Well, the stats would say that she can, because she is 2-0 against Elena Rybakina, including that match in Ostrava that you mentioned at the end of 2022. Yeah, I mean, it really is fascinating to track Krejcikova because there's very little about her game that you would think is hitchy or would break down or would require a tremendous amount of confidence or rhythm. But I mean, there is something to be said about the sheer number of injuries that she has had in 2022, and then again this year, going winless on clay, missing Indian Wells and Miami, and then making it back to grass to sort of play a couple matches to get into form. Although don't knock the Potapova loss, because Potapova's beaten some very future impressive players over the last year and a half. She beat Coco Gauff twice last year. She beat Jasmine Paolini in Indian Wells. Poor Paolini made her big ascent and now beats Krejcikova. So definitely, if you're looking for a future slam champ in the next couple of months, look at who Potapova's beaten in the last 3 to 4 months, because you might find her. But yeah, I certainly didn't see this coming, and I don't think I saw it even coming against Ostapenko today, the way Ostapenko has been playing her last 4 matches. I was certainly very impressed by the efficiency with which she had rolled through the draw against probably collectively, it's probably about somewhat of an equivalent draw, but I was really impressed by the way she handled Tomljanovic in a rematch of a very dramatic Wimbledon match from a couple of years ago, the way that she was able to handle Putintseva fresh off a win over Iga Swiatek. Just seemed to be, and was hitting the ball really cleanly to start, won the first 6 points. And you feel like, okay, this is going to be a quick one for Ostapenko. And Krejcikova really just dug in, was really emotionally intense in a way that was positive, and shook off the fact that she was down 4-1 in the second. really just impressive to me. And it does make you think that, this is her first semifinal since she won Roland Garros. She's undefeated in semifinals and finals in her career. A whopping 1-0, but certainly something to consider that she is, has the experience and also has positive memories and an opponent that she's comfortable against. So I think she's certainly going to be a really tough one against Rybakina. And I do think there is an argument to be made that this is somewhat the de facto final.
Yeah, I would have more confidence in Krejcikova's performance because I thought she served particularly well against Ostapenko. I thought she protected her first serve particularly well.
Yeah.
More than anything, I thought she just hit spot serve so well. First spot, look, I have to jam your body because if you give Ostapenko anything out in front, oh my God, like she just was connecting with it so well all week long. Krejcikova said first serve body, second ball or first strike to the open court, right? And it's just, I'm getting her on the run. And it was very repetitive in the play, although very smart in changing her spots and trying to misfoot and mixing in drop shot and mixing in angle, not just playing drive. The problem was Ostapenko served horribly. I think she was under 50% on her first serve for the match. I think it was like 35 unforced errors. I have it in front of me. 35 unforced errors against 16 winners. It just, Rybakina won't give Krejcikova that much leeway, that much rope, right? And I do think in particular, it was just the poorness behind the first serve. Krejcikova was able to find such a rhythm on the return, was able to generate such depth on first strikes, not only behind her serve, but in those return games as well, because Ostapenko was so compromised with the serve. That said, it's the other side of the coin. The power tennis, the line drive with which Ostapenko plays when she connects, and let's be clear, she still had that front foot mentality. It was still, I think, a 4-6 match, right? Overall. It's not the worst warm-up. It's not the worst demo for the sort of ball and the sort of game style Rybakina is going to throw at Krejcikova. And to some extent, Krejcikova has always been a little bit of a tennis chameleon, right? The better the opponent, the better the Krejcikova, the lesser the opponent. Sometimes you get those lesser performances. And, again, since the start of 2022, despite all the absences, the starts and goes, 15-19 against the top 20, 7-7 against the top 10. By the way, she was 7-3 against the top 10, but she's lost her last 4 straight to Aryna Sabalenka, and that's really screwed up her stats. So she is 6-3 against anyone not named Aryna Sabalenka during that stretch of time in the top 10. How she attacks, how she can maybe not take the racket out of your hand, but Krejcikova is going to do what she's going to do, right? Like she's going to play first strike. She's going to mix in some slice. She's going to miss long because that's just how she'd rather miss than let you swing against her and play freely. She has the right mentality to beat Rybakina. I guess my final question to you, as well as expanded thoughts on that monologue, DK, is have you seen enough with your eyes that she is playing well enough to pull off the win?
I think she is. And I also think
Okay.
she's just in a very positive headspace overall. I mean, for those of us who are on X, formerly known as Twitter, may have noticed Barbora Krejcikova in their mentions because she's been replying to and tweeting a lot of fans and seems to, whether she's searching her own name or has followed a good amount of people or even just is on her For You tab, the Casper Ruud hated For You tab, and just seeing a lot of people talking about her and engaging in a lot of debates about herself, which in sort of a cheeky, fun way, which is certainly obviously do that in healthy doses. Don't spend too much time online. But I think if you're an elite tennis player, but I do think right now it does remind me a little bit of the way Krejcikova was conducting herself on social media at the end of 22, early 23, when she was playing similarly well. And there's something to be said about that. But I also think the Rybakina is in a pretty decent headspace as well. It's been better in press conferences this tournament. Has visited the Tennis Channel live desk, and has been joking about her Red Bull sponsorship, which a partnership that seems somewhat at odds with her more laid back personality, to say the least. So I think I think it's shaping up to be a very high quality match. And I think even in spite of the Ostapenko serve difficulties, there were large swaths of the Ostapenko Krejcikova match that was very high quality. I think there was arguments to be made that the fact that there was no roof maybe did futz with the Ostapenko serve toss and serve rhythm more than we thought. The big, determining factor perhaps of the first week and a half of the tournament was that it was largely conducted indoors for the stadium. So maybe that did help Ostapenko serve in a better rhythm for her first four or so matches. But It's a really tough one. It really is a tough one to pick because I think they're both very much in rhythm. So I think the big disappointment here would be if we got a bad match,
Yeah.
regardless of who wins.
Indoors, you could see a lot of holds, but I just think that amplifies the Rybakina strength that much more. And again, I just think Rybakina is better at all the things that Krejcikova wants to do, except for volleying. Krejcikova better feel at the net. Krejcikova maybe puts a few more returns in play as well, but I just think the power amplified the rhythm, and more importantly, how fresh Rybakina is to this point of the tournament, right? Hasn't dropped a set since that Siegemund match. I would lean her way. Last two stats for you, DK, and then we're going to move on to the bottom half, and I'm going to let you monologue about Donna Vekic because no one has covered the Donna Vekic beat closer than you. Krejcikova, since, again, the start of 2022, 8-0 in the semifinals she's reached over that stretch of time. Just saying, 8-0 when she's gotten to the semifinals. Here's the other thing. Career against opponents over 6 feet. She's 10-6 overall. She's won her last 5 against those sorts of opponents. Here's why I bring that up. When she finds her contact point on the return with how flat she drives that ball and how early she catches it, again, it's the double skill set translates so well to singles. She can rush Rybakina. Like, Rybakina is not going to have the easiest time to set the forehand. Now, there is times when Krejcikova too frequently will turn to the bump return to just get that ball back in play, and that's where Rybakina will have a matchup, obviously, advantage, and my fear is that Krejcikova will be forced into that play too frequently because it's a little bit more difficult to try and short hop that Rybakina first serve. Not to get, again, I'm nerd talking here with you, DK, but I lean Rybakina. I'm just saying there's a hot take here. The way Krejcikova attacks opponents, how she'll be able to rush Rybakina, there is a very clear path, especially indoors where everything's that much cleaner.
Yes, assuming that there's rain and it is indoors. Yeah. We don't know that. I haven't checked the forecast
assumption
for
of
tomorrow.
The 2 weeks.
I mean, it is one of those things where I feel like nobody's really been picking Rybakina for most of the tournament, even though if you looked at each individual match, I think you would pick her, but just in the context of where she's been and how she's performed at slams, it would just be a rough one because she's taken some strange losses over the last 18 months. But this is her moment. This is very much it's familiar, reminiscent of like a Petra Kvitova in 2014. Like, this is your time. Like, the draw has broken your way. There's no one that you can't beat left in front of you. Now you have to do it.
Well, I'm glad you said the draw has broken your way because that gets us to the next player. And here's the context I'll add before I let you go, because there are 2 exceptional interviews with Donna Vekic recently tweeted out from the archives over the past 2 years on tennis.com, written by a man on this show by the name of David Kane, that I recommend everyone should go read if you want some insight into what goes through the mind of Donna Vekic at this stage of her career. But David Kane, if you were to draw up the ideal pathway to a semifinal, as an unseeded player, by the way, Wang Xiyu and Andreeva, not named Mira, no disrespect to you, Erica, that was for the sake of the joke, Diana Yastremska as your 1 seed, Paula Badosa, and first-time quarterfinalist Lulu Sun. That's a pathway to the semifinal for Donna Vekic. The same Donna Vekic who, going into Bad Homburg the week before Wimbledon, was 49 in the rankings, in jeopardy of falling out of the top 50, in jeopardy of just wondering, am I going to have to play qualifying at these 1,000 level events? Am I going to not get into the 500s in San Diego or wherever they are now in Ostrava and have to go play, the Cluj-Napoca and, Vampire Suit Up that week or whatever it may be? She was in jeopardy of just having to make a different plot course for the events you're going to have to play. And now she gets that draw. And now she's into the semifinals, and now she's back up to 21 in the world. Just talk me through this moment. Can Vekic win this thing, DK?
I mean, I really have to object to the idea that this was in any way an easy draw. I mean, certainly the first 2 rounds, there have been tougher opponents, but I think Diana Yastremska, Australian Open semifinalist, certainly a strong competitor on grass. That one went 2 really tough tiebreakers before Vekic won in 3. So I don't necessarily bump against that one. And Paula Badosa, played phenomenal tennis this week, beating Daria Kasatkina, played really well throughout that match and had to deal with multiple rain delays. And I even bump on Lulu Sun as an easy quarterfinal opponent. I mean, honestly, I think a lot of us were talking about the very high probability that Sun walked away with that match because Sun had all the momentum, had ostensibly no pressure, against a player who had yes, been in quarterfinals before, but had never been farther, and was coming off of a really tremendous emotional win over Emma Raducanu. I mean, looking at that, that felt very stressful if you're Team Vekic, because you feel like that's the trap match, because you just had this emotionally satisfying win over Paula Badosa, who's a former world number 2. You're playing really great tennis. You're back in a slam quarterfinal with all of the context that you just outlined for us. And then you have to play Lulu soon to make a slam semifinal. That is a match that you lose the first set 7-5 of, and then perhaps the second or the third, depending on how it goes. So the fact that she really blitzed soon in the third set, I think won 16 of the first 20 points. She really blanked her in a way that really impressed me and was a testament to the way how cleanly she's been striking the ball. Yes, it is a bit of a lesser Rybakina. Obviously doesn't bring the same amount of strength and technical proficiency. There isn't the same tautness to the shot that Rybakina brings, but it created a very similar effect in that third set against Soon, which is blitzing the ball, particularly off the serve and the forehand. So I was, as you intimated, I go way back with Donna Vekic, back when it was still called Twitter. We were talking away before I was long before I was a tennis journalist, and Donna was making her way onto the tour. We're not that far apart in age, and she was at the time a very active social media user. I think still can be to certain degrees. I've had some really great chats with her over the years. I mean, she is another one who has dealt with a ton of injury, was really rounding into form, became a top 20 player in 2019, had to deal with COVID, locking everything down, and then having one injury turn into another. And we joked in TC, talking about, the wide open fields right now and how frustrating it must have been for her to be playing, knowing that she's not at her best and seeing these opportunities. And I would love to ask her if there's any specific draws that she can think of or thinking, that could be me. And this is how I was feeling coming into that quarterfinal. You talked that talk. This is your moment. This is your opportunity to make that Grand Slam semifinal. And so I couldn't be more proud of her that she was able to do it, and doesn't have an impossible shot at making this final.
She won 87% of her first serve points in that match, and that was very much manifested in what you saw with her ability to play first strike, her hitting her different spots. I mean, look, having watched Lulu in college, she's always been able to play that sort of brand of power tennis, and a sneaky good athlete as well.
That also made the win very satisfying for me.
I'm sure it did.
Pro beat college.
Well, I'm just saying, 2021 finals, her versus Taya Pashkaleva, Pepperdine versus Texas to clinch it. Third set, I think over 1,000 people were there, just like everyone surrounding it. That's the best energy I've ever seen in a 4-3 final in person. Not the best match I've ever seen, but the best energy I've ever been a part of in college tennis. And I mean, again, for Lulu to be outside the top 100 to make that quarterfinal run, such a special moment for her. Where does she go from here? She had been having consistent success at the ITF level, 50Ks, 75Ks. Obviously, this ramps up or very much accelerates her pathway to the tour now moving forward. But yeah, again, there is a calmness to Vekic, a poise, if that makes sense. And it's not a quantifiable thing, but she still carries herself like she's a top 10 player in the world, right? And there is something to that persona when the opportunity comes, being able to capitalize on it and being in the right position. Again, down a set to Soon to, I think it was she ended up 32 winners against 26 unforced errors. She executed so soundly down the home stretch. I know that doesn't sound particularly flashy, but just like there were no mistakes. There was no let up. The moment she got that break advantage in set number 2, she took it. She ran with it. She acknowledged, hey, my opponent, you're making a face at me.
I mean, she did hit 5 double faults trying to serve for that set. And that did seem like and then she lost the next 5 games in a row sort of match. I mean, to give credit to both Soon and Vekic, they both made pretty big boss coaching hires, whether it's Donna with Pam Shriver or Lulu Soon with Vlado Platonic, who has worked with the likes of really a lot of players on the WTA, most notably off the top of my head, I think of Daria Kasakina and that famous on-court coaching timeout from Charleston 2017, where he just almost physically lifted her back into a match against Laura Siegemund that she was losing. So it just brings a lot of tour level experience and intellect that I think is really rubbing off well on a Lulu Soon, who's making that transition from college to pro tennis.
Yeah, and for Lulu to beat Raducanu, for Lulu to...
That's big.
Yeah, I mean, come on. It's just what a special moment that was too. And I love how she strikes the ball. Like I always have. And again, She's sneaky smooth, just with everything, DK. And yet, like you're right. I should have mentioned the double faults. I appreciate you pointing that in for Vekic. I guess it was the game plan in set number 3, how aggressively she
Oh,
played, and just it was foot on the gas pedal. That's the point I was trying to accentuate. Is just, hey, I got through that second set. I managed to hold. I managed to close things out. Let's fucking go. Like,
no
let's not
letdown
screw this.
there,
Yeah,
which was
yeah.
shocking.
Let's not screw this up any further. And she didn't. It was a decisive 6-1 third set. And look, if I'd have said it in January of 2024, it's going to be a Vekic Paolini semifinal. Who you got? We both would have laughed our way to a Vekic final. Like, what? Paolini made a semifinal. David Kane, we've buried the lead here because we're 40 minutes in and we're just talking about it, but it's because we've talked about it so frequently already this year, so we're just revisiting. I just, I cannot remember anything like this. I get it. Karatsev went from the Challengers to a run in Australia. That was one run. Like, players have made one run from their mid-20s to, or like in their mid-20s, seemingly without that track record of success before. She's now gone French Open final, Wimbledon semifinal back to back. Paolini is very definitively ranked as the 5th highest player in the world. Barring a cancellation of the WTA Tour Finals, Jasmine Paolini is going to be at this year's Tour Finals, and she's fucking earned it. Like, obviously, I watched that Madison Keys match. Maddie had her up 5-2. The knee, obvious, that was a huge moment, and that was an escape for Jasmine Paolini. I still, though, even fully healthy, would have liked to see Keys serve that out because, again, Paolini was putting balls in play. Paolini was starting to just disrupt some rhythm for Keys and find out her thirds and just, again, get Keys stressed physically. And then for her to rebound from that gift there, I say, and I hate to phrase an injury as a gift, but just that the opportunity that emerged. I guess that's the way to be given that opportunity and to come out and play the match she did against Emma Navarro, where she was just striking everything perfectly, where Emma never even had a chance to work her way into that match. In a match where you see the two players from a physical profile standpoint, from a skill set standpoint, you feel like this should be pretty level. These are two players who kind of go about things the same way. And other than the recent French Open experience, there's really not this massive gulf or delta in experience between these two at this stage. I just like, she's playing like a top 5 player. She looks like a top 5 player. The results say she's a top 5 player. I'm done fighting it, David Kane. Jasmine Paolini's a fucking top 5 player. She's the new Pagula. Move over, Jess.
I mean, the player who most quickly jumps to mind is very much in the Jasmine Paolini mold, but perhaps a less offensive version, is Sara Errani, who very much did that in 2012. I think made the 4th round quarterfinals of Australia, made the French Open final, and I think made the US Open semis. And then, had like just a phenomenal year, ended up peaking at number 4 or 5 in the rankings. But yeah, I mean, it's so fascinating to like look back on that bottom half and the way the momentum has shifted in favor of different players. I mean, for a second there, it looked like this was Emma Raducanu's moment, and then it looked like it was Emma Navarro's moment to make a Grand Slam final, and then to see what Jasmine Paolini was able to do against a player that she'd never beaten in 3 previous matches. It really did seem like this was Emma's match to lose, but I don't think that she lost it. I think Paolini really just took the racket out of her hand, which is not something that you would expect to say about Jasmine Paolini, about anyone on any surface, much less on grass. And I think there's talk about, the fact that she is a more diminutive player. She's been able to make use of the lower center of gravity that grass courts provide a player, and it allowed her to adapt to the strike zone more successfully than even, an Iga Swiatek or a Coco Gauff, who've been obviously great clay court players and have now, really started to struggle from that, make that clay to grass transition. And again, I mentioned this on a competing podcast, the idea that, Jasmine Paolini is really just that perfect combination of someone who is happy to be there, but is also very hungry for more wins. And hopefully this continues. I mean, as you said, this is now really going to be the first 5 to 6 month stretch where we're going to have a lot of expectations, or certainly more expectations than we ever had of Jasmine Paolini. So whether she can stand up to that pressure and intensity, that remains to be seen. But so far, certainly has outperformed anyone's expectations, much less what she was able to do at this tournament. And credit to her that we could still very much have a women's final be between 2 top 10 players, which is certainly something we didn't think was possible at, the midway point of this tournament.
2012 Irani is a great poll by you. That's the before me era. So I defer to you on that one. I mean, certainly of the last 5 years, like thinking through it, is the best comp 2021 Krejcikova, where it just kind of like all the dominoes fell into place. And Krejcikova was a couple years younger, even from an age perspective, but it was just kind of like it clicked at the Australian Open and then it clicked the rest of the way. And that's just who she was for the remainder of the year. Like that's kind of the Paolini story. Like it clicked in February in the Middle East, and that's who she's been for the remainder of this season. But I mean, even then, like Krejcikova at least had the doubles piece that you could turn to and like the pedigree of, okay, she's been in later stages of majors before. I guess Paolini had a longer track record of just singles matches under her belt, but it's just like how she has turned that power, firepower she has always had. Like there have always been flashes of Paolini can be explosive, but how she has reined that into a 75% neutral ball that at her size just has no business being as heavy as it is. Shot in, shot out. How well she uses her speed. She had 4 wins on grass courts coming into this event. And now, again, she's won 6 grass court matches this event alone to beat Navarro, Andrescu, like a Sorribes Tormo, who is always a nightmare to face. Obviously, the Keys match, she was still in it pre-injury as well. Like that was a real fight. Paulini's just fucking good. Like she just is. I'm sorry for swearing so much, but I just like I'm so wrong about it. And I just like I feel like if I verbalize it out loud, that's how I'll get myself to accept this is just who Jasmine Paolini is.
And I'll add up that Keys match, because I rewatched it, tried to see
Yeah.
where the injury appeared to manifest itself, and it did appear to be on that break point. That
Yeah.
at that point, Paolini gotten one of the 2 breaks back, and this had been sort of a streaky sort of match where Keys was up 5-1 in the second, lost that lead. She was up 5-2. Does she hold on to that lead if she stays healthy? So I don't look at that as a total gift because she was playing really great tennis for most of that match. Could have gotten it done in 2, had that second set tiebreaker. So I don't. And then look at Roland Garros, where she was able to beat, have a good quality win over Rybakina and route to that final. She's really done things by the book. I think the only thing that's just been out of step is just sort of the fact that we did not expect this of her. Someone of her size, of her game style, while explosive, is not certainly, a Sabalenka explode. I mean, when we've been talking about players who can break through at the top of the game, we've not been describing players who play like Jasmine Paolini. This seemed very much like a player destined to be between that 20 to 40 range for most of her career. To even have a career like a Donna Vekic, to make a Grand Slam semifinal at the closing in on 30. Wow, what a tremendous accomplishment. But she is someone who's really rewritten the narrative and flipped the script for herself in a way that I do think has some longevity, at this point. I mean, I think we're all done declaring this to be a one note, a one off. This is now 3 services and 6 months of protracted excellence. So I think definitely counter out at your peril going forward.
I like that we've gotten one of these a year. It's like it started with Pagula and Sakari and Krejcikova and Kontaveit, and then it kind of morphed in. I should have thrown Jabeur in that mix as well.
What a list.
No, and then it's like we had a Muhova moment, a Vondrousova moment. Now it's a Paolini moment as well. Like we are always getting 1 to 2 of these mid-20s players who click each and every season. I just think it's worth when you're doing your preseason projections. Hey, what's my top 10 look like? The Paolini profile of someone who's been like 3 years from now, if it hasn't clicked, Potapova is going to do a 2024 Paolini.
Don't tease me.
Or let's hope that isn't the case and it clicks sooner, because I'm just saying, like, the groundwork is actually just being set there, DK, for that to happen.
She beat Paolini in Indian Wells. I was there because I remember I interviewed Potapova before that match and did not realize that she was going to play Paolini next. And I thought to myself, oh God, this is so on brand for me to look at a match between Paolini and Potapova and go, I simply must catch up with Potapova. But then she won, and I was like, okay, good. I'm back on track. But obviously Paolini has went on to embarrass me in the subsequent 3 to 4 months, but all credit to her.
All right, last 2 here quickly. And again, why we want to spend more time on the women's semifinals coming tomorrow. So this is what you'll hear first. More time tomorrow to talk about the men's semifinals more in depth.
Well, I hope you're watching it now. I hope you're watching it live.
And don't you worry, we're gonna
don't tell them to watch it tomorrow. Tell them to watch it now.
No, I meant the matches themselves.
Oh yes.
Yeah, not us. Of course they're watching us live. That was without question. Power rank these 4 most likely to win. I'd go Krejcikova, or excuse me, I go Rybakina 1. I would go Krejcikova 2. because I just think she has the best chance of beating Rybakina of the field remaining. Paolini 3, Vekic 4. Give me your quick power rankings.
Oh gosh. Because it's like who's if it's not Rybakina, then because you feel like if it's not Rybakina, then it means Rybakina is not in the final, which means that Krejcikova is in the final, and then things start to look a bit more tricky for a Vekic or a Paolini potentially winning that title. You asked me for a quick one, and I am procrastinating here.
This is good.
It just seems very. I mean, it seems so boring to say Rybakina, Krejcikova, Paolini, Vekic in that order. So I don't know. I think Rybakina, Vekic, Krejcikova, Paolini. Because I've been really impressed by the Vekic forehand. I think that both Rybakina and Vekic are doing similar things, and they've been similarly effective. And again, with Vekic, it's like, if not now, when? This is, and she's someone who I think has been aware of that, and the fact that she was able to get over that mental match in the quarters makes me think that, I don't know, it makes me think some things.
All right, fair enough. We are going to hit all of these storylines on Monday of next week when David Kane, I'm signing you up right now for another live show, whether it's Monday, whether it's Tuesday. I'll have to actually check your schedule. But things that have happened since we last recorded that we haven't yet discussed, we're not going to do it tonight because I want the full graphics. I want the full Westhoff experience for everyone to enjoy. But you get one sentence on all these topics before we end. You ready?
Okay.
All right. Ostapenko.
One sentence about her? Okay. I feel so sad for her. I really wanted her to win this tournament or make the final. She'd been playing so well, but especially after the up and down start of the season. But hopefully she's able to carry this momentum onto her hard courts that she considers just too boring because it's too predictable.
Yeah, that's the ACT sentence they're going to use and say, fill in the grammar properly. That was perfect.
That was a Virginia Woolf sentence. That was 18 clauses.
Okay. Iga and Iga discourse.
I'm exhausted.
That's the right sentence. I agree. Iga and Iga grass court discourse is exhausting. Motherfuckers. She won 23 in a row or whatever it was. I don't know what to say. Like, if you're I'm sorry for swearing. If you're glass half, like, watch tennis week in, week out. Don't overreact. That's my case on the Iga grass court discourse. Two things can be true. She needs to get better on grass courts. It doesn't impact anything else moving forward. Lulu Soon.
I mean, great for her. I mean, but this is a player that I had never heard of before. And so I'm just getting to know. And so I will have to, suspend judgment till further notice.
Just getting to know, I think, is a fair sentiment for the entirety of
and I
the
like what I
world.
see. I'll say.
Just getting to know, but I like what I see. That's the sentence. Lock it in, Westhoff. Cut around that when you release this in podcast form. Raducanu.
So it's another tricky one because this is clearly a player who gets hot, and you wonder what a loss like this will do for her going forward. If it's, going to be one of those, emotional letdowns, or if she'll use this to inspire her for more. But I think we've seen now that it's not necessarily about technique. It's not about power or athleticism. It's if she's healthy and if she's feeling confident and can run hot, she can be very dangerous. But I could not tell you the next time that will be.
Okay. Cautiously optimistic is what I would say for Raducanu. It's good to know that tennis is still in there. The American women.
Who? I mean, go on. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I mean, obviously, Navarro made the quarterfinals, but I mean, who are we talking about here? We're talking about Goff and Pegula and
Navarro
and Daniel
Keys
Collins
and Collins.
It's just, I don't know. It's funny. They're just it's so weird to group them like that because I feel like I'm so used to grouping the American men that way. I don't think of the women as a group necessarily. They're all such individual personas. Solid. I mean, in some ways disappointing. Obviously, I picked Coco Gauff to win the tournament, and it did seem like perhaps that Danielle Collins was building up ahead of steam to do some big things this tournament. Disappointing that I believe she didn't end up playing on center court, which is something that I believe she wanted to do. I guess it's sort of like a B overall for the American women based on their final results, maybe a B minus, because you certainly would have expected at least Coco to make the quarters just based on seeds. If not, obviously Pegula came in streaking, underperformed by that metric. So I guess a bit of a bummer for the American women, all told.
Heck of a sentence. B would have been a B plus had Keys stayed healthy, pulled off that Paolini matchup because her Navarro through. It speaks to this group has depth. Like it is an interesting group. Goff, Navarro, Keys, Pegula, Collins. Obviously, we'll lose Collins at the end of the season, but I'm intrigued. Poots.
Oh, I mean,
I think that's perfect. That's all I needed. That's the response I was hoping for on Poots. We can leave it there. That's everything on the women's side. We will follow up, obviously, on everything when he and I next congregate for this show. But that's how we got here. That's what we've learned. We still have to go with the state
that
of
was an
dress.
appreciative laugh, but for the record,
Yeah.
that was not a pejorative laugh. That was
No,
just
I
a.
real ones know. They could see it. We're live. They can see your face. They
That's true.
know. Yeah, what that laugh was from a place of joy and not a place
Ah,
of anger or any sort of malice. And so that's everything on the women's side. Let's go over to the men's side now. And obviously, we get a day to marinate on these matchups. Certainly, 3 of the 4 semifinalists. Not shocking, given we've seen them in this round before. Daniil Medvedev, Carlos Alcaraz, Novak Djokovic, I believe, all semifinalists last season. Certainly, we know Alcaraz, Djokovic were. They are joined by a new Italian, not Yannick Sinner. They are joined by a man by the name, excuse me, of Lorenzo Musetti, who this is one of those I have been beating on the drum of this mini break podcast for the last month. If you are watching the tennis week in, week out, if you can grind through the Mallorcas, the Birminghams, the Eastbournes, the Den Bosches of the world, the way I know David Kane does every week on tour, I hope you all saw the wink here live. You know how well Lorenzo Musetti was playing via the eye test over the course of this grass court season, entering Wimbledon. He makes semis in Stuttgart before getting knocked out by Berrettini, but beats guys like Bublik, Pericard there. Makes the finals of Queen's Club, beats a Demon Hour, beats a Jordan Thompson. Now to beat Pericard, Darderi, Lestian, Comasina, and obviously the big one here, Taylor Fritz in 5 sets to clinch a spot in the semifinals, his first at the major level. Is he the most underrated 22 and under talent we have? It just feels like, again, there was a moment 2020, 2021 clay court season where you would have thrown Musetti up there in the prospect rankings with a Sinner, with an Alcaraz, with a Runa, given again, he was a teenager. And for those of you with long enough memories to remember that September in Rome, he beats Wawrinka, Nishikori to make round in 16 in Rome as an 18-year-old the next year. Obviously, to have the run that he did at Roland Garros, makes round of 16 up 2 sets to love on Djokovic. There was a moment where Musetti was a tier 1 21 and under prospect right alongside of those guys. Lot has happened in between now and then. But let's start with the Musetti piece, because obviously that's the most surprising of it all, DK. That's the only match we saw here today. What did you make of his quarterfinal victory? What have you made of this run?
I just want to clarify. I was laughing because you mentioned beating the drum for Lorenzo Musetti, and I was just thinking of my friends at the Gay Tennis Podcast who've been beating something a little different to the thought of Lorenzo Musetti. Just because I love that picture of him in his calves. It's good. It's a good picture. They posted a lot. But
That's
yeah,
really good. Carry on.
the live one for you.
That's
It's a live
really
one for you
good.
folks.
That's really good.
I mean, I think the big thing about Musetti, besides his calves, is just the sort of the lack of seeming mental fortitude. I think he's just one of those players who, you know, nowadays, I think Anna Kournikova, maybe it's rebounded back to being a compliment, but it's sort of Anna Kournikova and someone who's just, physically very capable, a lot of beautiful technique, but just maybe not all there when it really counts. I even got a text from a friend saying, someone who was trying to assuage a friend who's a big Taylor Fritz fan. I was like, I simply must meet this person. Anyone who's a self-avowed Taylor Fritz fan, I was like, I don't think I've ever met like a huge Taylor Fritz fan. But
Yeah.
he was trying to tell her that, don't worry, it's 5, even at 5-0, Musetti always chokes. And he didn't choke today. In fact, I turned off the stream at 2-0 because I was thinking, oh God, this is going to be a big mess with Musetti up 2-0 in the 5th. But it's one of those moments where you don't, we saw what happened against Djokovic last month at the French, and you're thinking, he couldn't get that one done. And here he is in the quarters against an informed Taylor Fritz, up 2-1. Can he get it done? And it just, compared to, the mental steel traps in his generational cohort, the Jannik Sinners, the Carlos Alcaraz, even what Holger Rune has been able to do up and down throughout the last couple of years, has been able to just post some really clutch results. And Musetti, for all his flash and aesthetic ability, has not been able to translate that, although we've seen it trend upward somewhat. This was the first really big win. I mean, we could talk about the Pericard win, yes, but it's still a lucky loser in the 4th round of a slam. This is the big one, and this is the one that you would hope carries him to a new plateau mentally that we might see perhaps a different Musetti in the semifinals. That's hard to gauge against someone who is as vaunted and talented as a Novak Djokovic, but I wonder how different he will play in light of the sort of mental hurdle having been cleared.
Beating the odds. That's what you were referring to. Beating the odds over on
Beating
the
them
day
off, in
side.
fact.
Yeah. Look, the thing that also makes this run so fascinating for Musetti, I would echo everything you said. It's that the game style, aesthetically, eye test wise, you wouldn't think translates directly to Wimbledon, to a grass court where you want to play a little bit faster, where you want to be more aggressive, where you don't want to have a hitch in your forehand backswing that feels attackable. It's just not the case for Lorenzo Musetti, who maybe has the most effective backhand slice. Is it the most effective one-handed backhand on this surface since Fed? Is that a crazy thing to
I
say?
thought the one-handed backhand was dead.
Well, first of all, it is dead. Because the options of best one-handed backhands on grass courts since Fed is like Tsitsipas. That's the option. It was never Stan. Yeah, and so exactly, it's like there have a Dimitrov. Like there haven't been that many choices to pick from. This is the first one-handed backhand that's worked the way Fed's worked, the way that slice, just how he knifes. Honestly, you know who the answer is? It's Berrettini's slice backhand. That's the most similar to Fed in effect on this surface, how they play that backhand slice line and it just dips low on you and you have to pop something up, as Taylor Fritz just did routinely throughout the course of sets numbers 2 and 3. And Musetti was on top of it. And Musetti was popping forehands. And Musetti was disrupting your rhythm. It's also worth noting, like, you might be focused on the hips for other reasons, DK, but those hips are as fluid as they come.
Now, why am I in
it? Sorry, I meant the
I get thrown in
pejorative.
stuff.
You were the representative of people are staring at Mussetti's hips. Sorry, I stare at him too, and it's because he's so quick. Like he is a top 5 mover. I think we have in the game right now, just a combination of fluidity, explosiveness, anticipation. Guy can scoot around the court, and for him to drop, again, it felt like Musetti had all the momentum. There's a long 2-all service game for Fritz in that 4th set that he ultimately held for 3-all. And when Fritz got that hold, I thought the momentum flipped. I thought, oh my God, Taylor Fritz held for 3-2, fought off some break points, seems to have weathered the storm. Now all of a sudden he holds for 4-3, breaks for 5-3. He's taken the set 6-3. I thought he had found some rhythm from the nadirs of how low his level got to end that set number 3, how helpless he looked out there because he just wasn't able to penetrate the court with how quickly Musetti was moving, how well he was stepping in on forehands that, again, his junk balls short balls that his junk tennis produced. And then Musetti righted the ship and he stayed the course and he stayed physical. And again, to get that 6-1 deciding set, like that was a high level of tennis from Musetti down the home stretch. Now, it was a choppy match. I was not scintillated by this one in the slightest. Like this was not the highest quality for my eyes. It wasn't the most physical. There wasn't the most rhythm. Yeah, there were moments of brilliance. There were some on the run Musetti magic, as there always is, some well-struck forehands from Fritz. But man, Musetti can make things ugly. And with the physicality he brings, the forehand weapon he possesses, the serve that continues to get better, guy's a warrior. Like that guy is a top 20 player for the next decade because he is just going to make the life miserable of many. And again, still just 22 years old, DK. Like it shouldn't be that crazy to see him have this sort of success.
No, I think it's just a case of Sinner and Alcaraz, and to a slightly lesser extent, Rune, setting the bar so high for his generation that his slower, relatively developmental growth has seemed a bit distressing. Certainly, I mean, that was a big one last month. I mean, it seemed like he finally was going to get that big win. He'd had Djokovic on the ropes a few years ago in Paris, then has him again on the ropes in 2024, doesn't get it done. You think, like this is not, this is not the makings of a world-beating talent if you can't get it done against, a player of, yes, of that caliber, but someone who is not playing that well, and then you don't get it done. But then you have this golden opportunity. I mean, you look at this draw compared to Vekic's draw, I think this is definitely an easier one. Definitely perhaps had a more experienced quarterfinal opponent, but also a quarterfinal opponent who's not played that great in slam quarterfinals. The Taylor Fritz loss here, that's a big one, especially coming after, what should have been, a pretty, edifying win over Alexander Zverev in the 4th round. And then, shows up flat, in the second and third set against Musetti, and then is not able to ultimately turn it around in the fifth. So that's its own story, but certainly for Musetti, who has all of the makings, that if you're comparing someone to Federer, I think that's already a really great selling point if you're trying to get somebody to watch a Lorenzo Musetti match.
The comparison
I guess
stops
you're
at
a
the
Djokovic
backhand
fan.
slice. Yeah, the comparison stops at the backhand slice.
But any kind of Federer combo. I mean, you don't get that. Certainly don't get that on the women's side. You don't hear really anybody get compared to Serena or even a Sharapova. It's like sometimes these players, they're reserved for a reason, and so the fact that we're already kind of making that comparison in any spectrum, it's worth noting.
Once said Iga was on pace at a certain age of her career to where Serena was on that pace, and my DMs have never blown up that largely. But
even that statistically, I'm talking about
exactly. But I'm saying I tried to make a statistical comparison, and that blew up, and I was like, yeah, I'm not doing these comparisons anymore. I agree with you. I'm only doing them on the podcast where I can sneak them in lightly and hope to not receive too much backlash. Let me ask you, 3 guys similar ages and prospects. 2 of them have made Slam semifinals, and yet I would argue the third is probably now the most highly regarded in terms of upside moving forward. One of them was born in December 01, the other 2 02s. But Jack Draper, Lorenzo Musetti, Ben Shelton. Rank all 3 as prospects, 1 to 3, in your mind.
I mean, I wanted to make Jack Draper number 1 when I picked him to make the goddamn Wimbledon semifinal.
Yeah.
So I feel like on spite alone, I shouldn't. I should put Ben Shelton number 1 because at least he showed up and played a really good fourth round, third set.
100%. Like Sheldon Draper are the inverses. Week in, week out, Jack Draper's getting to the quarters. I don't know what Ben Shelton's doing every week. Slam events, I know Ben's getting to week 2, and then we'll roll the balls out and play. Like it is funny how opposite end of the spectrum they are. Like Musetti's kind of right down the middle, and like there's some round of 16s, there's some good weeks spontaneously as well. Doesn't seem to need to run as hot and cold as Ben has, at least through a year and a half of full-time tour play. 3 fascinating prospects. I won't ask you to rank them, but I guess to say, if that's the next tier of prospect, because they're all similar in age range, if Alcaraz, Sinner, and we'll throw Runa just on respect in that top tier, is the next gen 2.0 age range, Draper, Musetti, Shelton is that tier 2, and those are 6 good fucking players.
Yeah, I mean that's something where they all bring something very different. They're all fairly different personalities. All seem like nice guys. Like it just seems like a really nice, passing of the torch, so to speak. I mean, assuming obviously Djokovic will play for another 15, 20 years, but other than him, the rest of them.
It also continues to add the urgency. Like if you're Casper Ruud, if you are especially an Andre Rublev, like, man, my window is closing fast because those are 6 guys.
Baby.
Yeah,
those
are all 6 guys who can be top 12 players for the next 5 years. Like if things click really quickly, if not longer than that. And then, certainly here's the difference. He already has one, but if he wants to add to his collection and not be known as the greatest one-time slam champion of all time, like this is Medvedev's window. It's like a 6 slam window where it's really like, hey, you are going to be a clear-cut front runner probably for the next 6 because you've earned that benefit of the doubt and you will still be in your 20s. For Medvedev to get that win over, in Jannik Sinner, but still for Medvedev to serve as cleanly as he did. I thought the game where he served things out, how cleanly that service game was at Love to close out the match 6-3, I believe, in the 5th. Like that just spoke to, it was a crisp serving day for Daniil Medvedev in a year where there haven't been many, again, win 76% of his first serve points, 15 aces on the day. It was broken 3 times, but 3 times in a 5-set match and a 2-breaker match. That was a strong reminder for Daniil Medvedev that, hey, man, like, especially as we head towards the back half of the year and we get back on hard courts, don't forget he's still a tier 1 guy. Don't forget the totality of things he can bring to the table, not just the grinded out mentality, not just all the funky improvisational 13 feet behind the baseline skills. There's still a first serve there. There's still a +1 there. And more than anything, there is still a brain there at work. And to see Medvedev change his tactics, change his return positioning, again, spot serve so wisely and attack so soundly behind his first strike in a way he just didn't do in sets 3, 4, and 5 in Australia. Sound reminder how good Daniil Medvedev is at tennis after, again, a 3-month stretch where he usually goes away. But this is where he wakes up. And in 2024, when other people who have significant things on the line, David Kane, have yet to wake up, it's good to know that gear isn't missing for Daniil Medvedev.
I don't even know who that was shade at, but I'll take it. It was very impressive. I mean, look, for Medvedev, I was impressed by the third set. Obviously, the fifth set was great, but the fact that he was able to win that tiebreaker after losing a 5-3 lead, with Sinner looking sick, but not as sick towards the end of that third set, you feel like, okay, this is where Sinner, who has won the last 5 matches against Medvedev, turns things around and wins his 6th straight match over Daniil. But I do think that first serve made a huge difference. It was not there for a large swath of this season, and for it to be back here does make a difference heading into this second half of the season, most notably the hardcourt season. Will it make a big difference against Alcaraz in the semis? I am less confident of that, especially having seen them play their semifinal last year. I would not think that I would not give him the same odds that I would have given him at the US Open last year, the way that Medvedev was able to play him there. But I think I am very relieved to see Medvedev be very much a part of the mix, because I think he was very much in danger of losing that. He'd already, it was hard enough to compete with, your Djokovic's, then your Alcaraz's, then to now lose, Sinner as a reliable player that you have an edge over. Then all of a sudden you're 4th, 5th, he's the 5th seed here. He was hoping in March that the year would bear him out as the 3rd best player on tour. But, at this point he was struggling for 5th. And so I think this is a really, really, reinvigorating result for him, and he certainly seems to be in a great headspace, playing really well in that really funny commercial with John McEnroe, just like down to clown, like really some good stuff for Medvedev all around this tournament.
Yeah, he's raised his level, he's volleyed well, and again, the crazy part, by the way, for Medvedev is his pathway to the Wimbledon title is Sinner, Alcaraz, Djokovic. It's brutal. You wouldn't wish that on your worst enemy. Obviously, for Medvedev, a little bit of a bailout in the
It's
Dimitrov
like
matchup as well. It's just like, again, we're going to give you the withdrawal against Grigor Dimitrov, but in return, your pathway is now Sinner, Alcaraz. Yeah, it's Berdych. That's a good comparison. Berdych, Ferrer, Cilic in that era, they're all calling him and being like, let me tell you what I had to go through back in the day to try and get there. And so certainly I do think Medvedev has raised his level. I don't know. I guess we'll go to the Alcaraz piece of it next, because look, Carlos has been pushed. 5 sets against Tiafoe, 4 against Humbert, 4 against Tommy. Now, we talked about that Tiafoe match. The moment Alcaraz won that breaker to win the 4th, it was never in doubt going into the 5th set. The Humbert match, look, Ugo, this was the grass court tennis you expected to see from him all month. He finally showed it down the home stretch. His weapons just make you uncomfortable, man. And he does the one thing I still think Alcaraz is susceptible to, which is you got to have the big racket. You got to be able to take the racket out of the hand and the big weapons, be able to take the racket out of the hand. You also, if you start rushing Carlos Alcaraz, he will rush. Like, he will hit himself into trouble over a 10 to 12 minute stretch of time where he'll give you, 10 errors in 17 points, we'll say, and just make life a little bit easier for you. Because for Alcaraz, the solution isn't to grind things down. The solution is always to hit through it. And, well, he's a 2-time slam champion, a 3-time slam champion, excuse me. I think we know how that mindset and mentality has worked out for him. Still, Alcaraz has been pushed. He has been susceptible so far, susceptible to pressure so far this event. What would you grade his performance approaching the semis?
I mean, I think this is pretty to talk about making a big swing in comparison, but this does feel like classic big 3 fare. Yes, he's been tested. Yes, someone's been able to play good against him for a set and a half, 2.5 sets, I guess, if you're Frances Tiafoe. But at the end of whether it was the Tiafoe match, the Humbert match, and for the last 3 sets of the Tommy Paul match, once he hunkered down, he became pretty much unplayable. And yes, and I do think this is a situation where best of 5 certainly helps him, because he's been able to not play great for 10, 12 points, but then is able to just go back to the drawing board, not panic, and just hit his way back into form, as opposed to hitting himself off the court. And so I've been very impressed by how he's finished all of these matches. Yes, they've been slow starts in a lot of them. And there were a lot of like Djokovic runs that I remember where he would like not win the first set of the first couple rounds, and then all of a sudden just, hit the ground running. And I do feel like we're heading into that stage of the tournament where now he's going to get a Medvedev, potentially a Novak Djokovic or a Musetti in the final. And I don't necessarily think we're going to get the slow start, but even if we do, I'm not at all worried that he won't be able to figure it out.
Yeah.
Some double negatives for you.
Well, just his weapons are so immense on this surface. And just again, you do feel like Medvedev. Here's the thing. Medvedev has to, he knows the game plan. It's the exact same game plan he employed against Jannik Sinner. He has to be that crisp behind the first serve. He has to be that relentless in attacking forward, even if you know, hey, Alcaraz, Sinner, they were both going to have a look at passing shots. Those passes are just that much more difficult to execute on this surface. And to quote a coach I was speaking with throughout the course of this Bloomfield Hills Challenger, hey, man, sometimes you just have to make the ball. Like, make the ball, make them make a pass. And guess what? If they make the pass, that's tennis, man. But like, they're not going to make the pass more than 3 out of 10 times. Those passing shots are really fucking hard to hit. And look, I just watched Medvedev beat Alcaraz in a slam semifinal last year in New York and watched Medvedev play just this breathtaking, aggressive, for like first strike, take it to, serve lights out, rush Alcaraz style of tennis and absorb Alcaraz's biggest blows. Is it possible to play that sort of tennis on a grass court? I don't know if it is. I think for Medvedev, it's going to have to be, again, a very similar game plan as it was against Jannik Sinner. He's going to have to hope to approach as well as he did, make as many first serves as he did, maybe even be that aggressive on the second serve. 11 double faults sounds high, but it's that or let Alcaraz smack a forehand at you and almost certainly win the point on the second serve. Alcaraz has been vulnerable. He was my pre-tournament pick. Medvedev is like, the signs are there. This is the shot for Medvedev to do it. I feel more confident about him going into this one because it's grass court tennis than I did for him going into that New York semifinal last year. I'm still picking Alcaraz. Like, again, it's his relentlessness, how well he attacks, how quickly he gets you on the back foot. Tommy played a great set. Francis played 4 great sets. It's just inevitable. Like, he is just going to overwhelm you. And I just think, again, his ability to take the racket out of your hand, that level's the highest level that we have in the field. So I'm going to bet on it.
I mean, I'm very annoyed because I picked Sinner to win this tournament. I feel like you just gaslit and browbeat me into picking Jannik Sinner.
Oh.
But I do think under ordinary circumstances, this does very much feel like Alcaraz's tournament to lose at this point. I mean, obviously you want to see that rematch. I mean, if you're a hardcore tennis fan, you probably do want to see that rematch between Alcaraz and Djokovic after the way they played last year, how narrowly Alcaraz won that match. How will Djokovic fare over the next, 2 to 4 days? Will he be able to, this will be his first really big test against a top player since Sinner. He hasn't really had to play a top guy because there have been injuries. He hasn't, so I'll be fascinated to see that final if that is what we get. But I am excited to see Alcaraz Medvedev. I don't have a ton of hope for Daniel, to be honest, but I also didn't see him making the semis, so we'll see.
I'm going to rewatch their matchup from last year tomorrow and offer some more thoughts to all of you listeners then. Yeah, look, again, Alcaraz is playing great front foot tennis. Tommy played well. Tommy's a good grass court player. Tommy, by the way, has turned into everything you dreamed he might have been back in 2015 when he wins Junior French Open. And as he's slowly ascending up the rankings, it's all clicked. The athleticism, the technique, the swagger, the freeness with which he plays. Like, Tommy Paul is that good of a player, and he's starting to hit his upside, which is a testament to him, his coaching team, everyone surrounding him. But yeah, Carlos was just too good down the home stretch of that match. Tommy's forehand wasn't able to sustain under that pressure. I mean, look, we haven't mentioned a guy by the name of Novak Djokovic, who looks well poised to make a sixth consecutive Wimbledon final. Again, he's going to make this one in his late 30s as well. It's just crazy. What are we even doing at this point? He didn't have to play a quarterfinal match. He's going to get 3 days of rest for that knee before he takes on Lorenzo Musetti on Friday, a matchup that is about as ideal as humanly possible for Novak Djokovic. Look, we could talk about the Runa Boogate. Whatever. It's funny to me. To me, that's just one of those things I like to laugh. I think we all just collectively need to get our ears checked. For me, it goes to the other side, though. And the fact that De Minaur Djokovic match didn't happen, and that it was because of another injury sustained on these grass courts. And this is not going to be we are now at a point where physically, you can't play grass court tennis. Like, you're just susceptible to injury. It's going to happen. I'm not in a position to where I can explain the physics of it, the science behind it, and make a concrete case to all of you listeners, viewers. So I'm not going to try and do that. I will say and this is something we were discussing in our group chat, David Kane, and this is where I want to end today's show. Because again, I'm going to get into the semifinals more tomorrow. Not that I'm not going to ask you for picks, but I'm just so fucking done with grass court tennis. I just so thoroughly do not enjoy it. And it's for a couple of reasons. Number one is that health piece. I feel like any point that's about to get good, that a rally is about to get extended, that someone's about to be pushed into an outer third, I feel like we are one false step away from an ACL tear anytime that happens. And with how hard these players hit the ball nowadays, how skilled they are, the fact that they're fucking sliding into shots on grass, which just feels like a recipe for disaster. The fact that the tennis can only be such high quality because, again, you're going to get bad bounces. You're going to get mishits. Points just are going to be shorter because of the nature of the tennis this surface is conducive to. I just don't like it. Like anything you can do on a grass court, you can do on a hard court. You can do on a clay court. There are just things you can't do on those two other surfaces, or you can do on those two other surfaces, that you can't on a grass court. And it's just limited tennis. And like, I'm not saying I dislike the aesthetics of Wimbledon. I'm not saying I dislike the notoriety that comes with, again, one you'd probably call the granddaddy of them all, the Rose Bowl of Grand Slam events. I'm just so fucking done with the tennis. Like, I just don't think the tennis is that good. I don't like the fact that even an extra 15% of rallies are 0 to 4 shot rallies. I don't like how many sloppy mishits there are because of crappy bounces. I just don't think the quality of tennis itself is that good. And like, attacking tennis can be played anywhere. Sabalenka and Rybakina can be good anywhere. Ostapenko is a French Open champion. Like, power tennis works on all three surfaces. On the men's side, Novak wins everywhere, so it's tough to like make a direct comparison. But like, look at the success of Berrettini and how he's worked everywhere, and just again all these different players who now work everywhere across surfaces. Let's throw, like, I know 5 weeks, and I took a Twitter poll, over 750 people voted, solid sample size. More people say they want more grass court tennis, that it's not long enough. And I understand I'm in the minority here, but I'm sorry. I just don't enjoy it.
Are you done?
I am done. Final words of this go to you. And by the way, at the end, throw in your men's semifinal picks, please.
Listen, I love that you had most of that rant next to that picture of Djokovic, like making the face, because it really did feel like a personal attack on Novak, who's won all those Wimbledon titles. And
wait, hold on,
I do hope, no, I'm not done.
Yeah.
I do hope you get like a very like confused set of replies from Djokovic fans who are like, wait a minute, you're going to take away his 7 Wimbledon title? How dare you?
Also takes away Feds, but well, I don't understand that argument, because like, Novak Djokovic is the greatest hard court player ever. Novak Djokovic is the second greatest clay court player ever. Like, Novak Djokovic's skills on a tennis court aren't compromised, whatever your views of grass court tennis are. Novak Djokovic is just fucking good at tennis. You could have him play on any surface in the world. He will be one shot better than whomever is across the net from him. Like, I just think grass court tennis sucks.
Okay, so there's a couple of things here. I think, I mean, my main gripe would appear to be with indoor grass specifically, because that does seem to be the conditions in which we're getting the most hectic injuries. I mean, which seems strange because there has been a roof over center court of Wimbledon since 2009. 4th round, and Arsafina beat Amelie Mauresmo. Don't forget. First full-length match was Andy Murray beats ? I can't remember. But that's been for like a decade, and for the most part, we haven't seen a ton of injuries. But now, I guess, obviously we saw it in 2021. Serena Williams and Adrienne Manarino, I'm pretty sure like within days of one another, if not the same day, injured themselves on the wet, moist grass. Like, there's something to be said about the way indoorifying and a court does make things more damp and moist down at court level, which then will make things more slippery. So there's that. There is the fact that clearly there's an issue with the equipment that is not allowing players to get the kind of traction that they seem to be looking for. Now, do we blame the traction and the equipment, or do we blame the tactics? Are players trying to play hard and clay court tennis on grass? And should they be, like famously Venus Williams would, most of her winning Wimbledon runs, should they be adapting their game to the surface and doing more to adapt their game to the surface? And furthermore, is that a question of younger players not having the experience on grass to do that. But then again, at the same time, it's a lot of older players who are getting injured. I mean, it's, Danielle Collins was had a medical timeout. Grigor Dimitrov, Madison Keys has played a million Wimbledons and got injured. So it's not necessarily an age thing. But all of the main issue does seem to be indoor grass. And now I don't know how you fix that. Now there's a roof on court 1, on center court, or there are going to be more rainy fortnights in the future where they're going to have to play a lot of matches on those surfaces in those conditions. And what they can do to fix that is going to be, and I do want to hear from the All England Club that they are looking to address this in some way, shape, or form, because that was the issue. It wasn't the tennis. It was the fact that a lot of these matches just did not get done or were compromised or in other ways ruined because of these injuries. You don't want to say, you don't want to see that. You don't want to see injuries. You want to see matches, however they look, ending.
But it's also, what do I want to see? I want to see Alcaraz blitzing forehands. I want to see Swiatek hitting backhands dug out of the corners. I want to see +1 Sabalenka forehands opened up with opportunities of side to side to side that she's pushed you. Like,
right.
I don't want crappy grass court tennis that rewards that immediately, or that the speed and the bounce is so far off that you can't even hit it that cleanly. And you're just like, you're getting away with junk. Like, the serve and volley era is over. Like, attacking tennis is always rewarded now on surfaces. Like, I get, like, it would be great to have more variety, more serve and volley. You want to see more different tactical things work. They work on clay and hard courts just as well as they work on grass. And I just, again, there are things you can't do that everyone can't do on grass that they can do on the others.
Yeah, listen, I bump on the idea that aggressive tennis is rewarded everywhere. I mean, when we're talking about aggressive tennis, particularly on the women's side, it's Aryna Sabalenka and Elena Rybakina, who play with such a level of power that they're hitting through what has been a slowing of conditions across the board. We're not seeing, you look at the top 10, it's not Caroline Garcia, dominating the top 10. It is your Maria Sakari's, your Coco Gauff's, who is as talented as she is, does not hit the heaviest ball. Even Iga Swiatek is not the biggest server, does not, is dependent on her high margins, heavy spin, which creates its own power. But these are not, this is not a top 10 of the Williams sisters, Capriati, Davenport, like we saw 20 years ago. And the reason why is because the surfaces are slowing down. So with that said, as someone who does prefer power tennis and who does prefer to see quicker points, does see serve +1 tennis, I don't think players should have to be working that hard to create that on the slower surfaces. And if grass or a faster surface rewards it, then I am in favor of that. I mean, we're talking at a time where Sabalenka, I would love to know the source of this shoulder injury. How did this come about? Because again, this is someone who's having to work very hard to hit winners, and is someone who should not be working that hard.
Yeah. I mean, look, the style of tennis has changed. The game has become more physical. We talked about what do we want. You made a comment in our group chat that the point of highest level athletics is to make things that are supposed to look hard look easy. I don't know if that's what I always want. Like, I think, first of all, even through hard work, they still make it look easier than I ever could. But I like that visceral effort and sweat and intensity. And, again, watching someone who you already know is this elite specimen be forced to find that extra gear as well, that I just think sometimes you're not forced to find.
I mean, I don't know. Throughout the course. We had long matches 20 years ago and even 10 years ago. This is not like, when we talk about the past, we're not talking about like, the 1970s and 80s where there'd be like 20-minute sets. I mean, there were still long sets and long matches 10 years ago. I think I hope we've gotten to an inflection point where things cannot get any slower. And there's still, there are tournaments that exist like your Cincinnati's, like a Wimbledon, I do think we do want to inject some faster court tennis, even just for the preservation of these players' bodies. I mean, for God's sake. I mean, it just does seem like something that would be beneficial. Even when I think of indoor tennis, sometimes these indoor courts are made very slowly. I mean, famously, the WTA finals in Singapore, having been there, you would just see the ball just sort of die on the court. It was just a very, very disheartening. And that bore out with often who won that tournament, and Agnieszka Radwanska or, and Alina Svitolina. These are players who are not big, heavy hitting players. For me personally, I like fast court tennis. I like aggressive tennis. I don't necessarily see the bad bounces. I think, Krejcikova and Ostapenko played a very clean match, and they were not, dependent on bad bounces. So I don't necessarily buy into that. And again, that was outdoor grass. So the best of what grass courts can offer, we'll really have only seen like 1 or 2 days of it for all intents and purposes.
Fair enough. That's where we can leave things. Maybe this championship weekend will make me change my viewpoint, because certainly, again, when we last recorded a week ago, I thought things were pretty steady on the women's side. Obviously, week 2 provided anything but that. We still got 4 more days of tennis to come here at these 2024 Wimbledon Championships. With that in mind, DK, what are you and the TNNS team up to over the next couple days?
Oh, anything and everything. Did you know that Roger Federer went to the Eras Tour? Cover
I,
that on Baseline.
I did not. I like that.
Yeah, the friendship basis and everything. I assume he brought his kids. That would be kind of weird if he didn't, right? Yeah, I guess he did.
I don't know. It's an experience. Like,
That's true.
it's funny. My mom asked, I'm home right now, and my parents asked, my mom goes, would you come with me to the Eras Tour? I was like, fuck yeah, I would. Like, that sounds like a great time.
Amazing.
I go, Mom, I do the bracelets and everything. She's like, you know about the bracelets? I was like, Mom, I think everyone knows about the bracelets. I think that's like a common, now I think, yeah, again, more people certainly know about the friendship bracelets than they do who's in the semifinals of these 2024 Wimbledon Championships. Nevertheless, we digress. DKTNNS on Twitter. Read everything him and the tennis.com team are up to. It is the best place to find, well, again, your up-to-date stories on everything happening in the tennis world. Of course, a thank you to our super producer, Daniel Westoff, as well, for getting us ready here on the live show tonight. DK, what sort of a job does he have to do?
Oh, and because he can hear me, he does a fuck of an editing job.
Day in, day out, makes it all possible. A shout out to him. A shout out, of course, to all of you who tuned into our live show. Hoping to do more of these as we continue to progress, not just throughout the summer, but moving forward as well. With that said, DK, you never gave me men's semifinals predictions. Who you got in Djokovic, Alcaraz?
I mean,
Djokovic, Alcaraz, Medvedev, Alcaraz.
I mean, Medvedev Musetti, obviously. I mean, like...
All right, there it is. There's your final. He's going Medvedev, Musetti. I'll go the other way just so we can disagree. Oh yeah, no. Again, my pre-tournament pick: Alcaraz, Djokovic, Alcaraz over for the title, still surviving. So, with that said, for the fantastic David Kane, our super producer Daniel Westoff, and all of us here at both Cracked Racquets and the Tennis Channel Podcast Network, I'm your host Alex Gruskin. DK, what do we tell our listeners?
And that's the break.
And we will see you all next time. Thank you as always, DK.
До свидания.